So I didn't put that word on there. Imagine the word base is written there. It should be written there. I don't know why it isn't. The first year that we start with, where we figure out the basket and the first set of prices, is called the base year, B-A-S-E, base year. Okay? And everything in these indices is based on this base year. This base year. All right? So let's suppose that in the base year, the basket costs $3,000 to fill. And today, the prices of that basket have gone up and is $3,300. Well, to find the CPI, I take the $3,300 I spent today, and I divide that by the $3,000 I would have spent back in the base year, multiply that times 100, and I get 110. 110 means that prices have gone up 10% since the base year. Simple? I add up everything in that basket in the base year. It cost me $3,000 a month. I add up everything in that basket now. It cost me $3,300. All right? I divide those two, multiply times 100, and that's the consumer price index. It's not hard, is it? But if they told you the basket's $3,300, you would have no idea what that means. If they tell you the price index is 110, you know exactly what that means, and it's easy. Okay? Doesn't let you compare anything. It doesn't have units. It doesn't have anything else. So if we say, hey, the CPI in Spain is 105 and the CPI in the United States is 110, that doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you that inflation is worse in the U.S. than in Spain or anything else. It doesn't tell you anything. It tells you that the inflation rate in Spain is 5% and the inflation rate in the United States is 10%. And other than that, it tells you absolutely nothing. Okay? Got that? All right. So what we create, that 110 that we create, is the index number. The index number for the base year is 100, right? If I take 3,000, divide it by 3,000, and multiply times 100, I get 100. 3,000 over 3,000 is 1. I multiply times 100. If the CPI is 200, that means prices have doubled. If the CPI is 2.4, that means prices are 240. That means prices are 2.4 times what they were. All right? These are called index numbers. Got it? Hopefully. So today, as we sit here, again, the base year is 83.84. Total CPI is 256. That says, on average, the things that these urban consumers buy today are 2.5 times as expensive as they were. Prices have risen 156%. They're 2.5 times as expensive. Food is 266. So food prices have gone up a little faster than other prices. Energy is 183. Energy prices have actually gone up more slowly, but part of that is the price of gas falling lately. Clothing, on the other hand, clothing prices in the United States have hardly gone up at all in the last 40 years. Why? Well, if you went back to 1983-84, clothes were made mostly in the United States. If you look at clothes now, they're mostly made somewhere else. So U.S. clothing companies have kept the price of clothes from going up by moving production outside of the United States. Right? So when somebody says, hey, we should make those clothes in the United States, well, how much more would they cost? Okay? Clothing companies have made consumers happy by moving clothing production outside of the United States and keeping the prices from going up. That's not even 1% a year clothing prices have gone up. All right? But then you say, well, they put all those workers out of work, and that's a bigger discussion, and that's our next chapter, actually. Going to the doctor is $383. It's almost 4 times as expensive to go to the doctor now as it was in 1983-84. So college tuition is about 5 times more expensive than it was. Yeah. On the other hand, computers, according to this, computers are 90% less. They only cost 10% of what they cost back in 83-84. And that is nonsense, my friends. That's just nonsensical. I will tell you 2 stories to hopefully get you to understand why this is nonsensical, and then we'll talk about problems with the CPI. UNLV was the 5th university in the entire country to have one computer that had a terabyte of data storage attached to it. 5th university in the entire country to have a computer with a terabyte of data attached to it. That terabyte costs $15 million. You can today for $60, or actually probably less than that, but $60, walk up the street to Best Buy, walk out of Best Buy with a terabyte hard drive. The terabyte that we had in 1986 filled a whole room over in the engineering building. This thing weighs 1.5 pounds and sits in your hand for $60 instead of $15 million. There were actually benches. You could go sit on it in the engineering building when it was there. Terabyte. The price of that terabyte has fallen from $15 million to $60, which is way more than 90%. And the current one is much faster. It works a lot better than the old one. Okay? I still have my very first laptop, which I bought in the 80s. It has a 4.77 megahertz megahertz, not gigahertz, megahertz processor in it. And it's only a 16-bit processor, not a 32 or 64. It's only a 16. It has no hard drive. It has a floppy drive on it. The screen can show you any color you want as long as it's blue. Yeah, it has 640K of RAM. Not M, not G. 640K of RAM. I have photographs. The photographs that I take on my phone won't fit on that computer. It doesn't have enough memory to show them, and the disk drive isn't big enough to store them. Okay? My modern laptop cost about the same as what that laptop cost, and yet it's quite literally thousands of times better. Okay? So how the CPI registered technology prices is just, it's not right. Okay. So what's wrong with the consumer price index? Well, the first and most obvious thing that's wrong with it is what we call substitution bias. So the base is 83, 84. 83 is the year that compact discs came out. Nobody downloaded anything because there was no way to download it. Compact discs. People had CDs. Most people in their car had a cassette tape player, so they drove around in their car playing tapes that they made at home. They had vinyl in their house, and CDs had just come out. You didn't have streaming video, and you didn't have Blu-rays and DVDs. You had tape. You had beta and VHS tape. Okay? How do you fix the basket? Think about, we didn't have cell phones, right? No cell phones. No PCs. No, think of all of this stuff. Okay, you still have a car, but your car back then, everything was manual, and it had an FM radio, maybe an FM radio, probably had an AM radio in it, and a tape deck, and yeah. We have changed dramatically the things that we buy. Dramatically changed the things that we buy. We call that substitution in economics, right? Well, the CPI can't possibly adjust for all of the changes in what we buy. They do their bestesses, and you can't fault them for doing their bestesses. But the fact that our basket today is so much different than our basket in 1983 means there's real questions about whether or not this is a useful exercise. It's not as bad when we're comparing last year to this year because, 1 year. But when you try to go back and, yeah. So we got that? Substitution bias. Quality bias. When I was a kid, my dad took my sisters out and taught them how to change tires on cars because invariably if you owned a car, every couple of years you're getting a flat tire and you had to go do something about it. My current car doesn't even have a spare tire. And most cars have these little spare tire-y things because you just don't expect a tire to go flat. Tires run much further than they used to. They last a lot longer. They're much less likely to break. They're way better than they used to be. How do you put that into the price? Right? The price of tires hasn't gone up that much. The quality has gone up a lot. How do you adjust for that? It's a problem. Okay? A lot of things are better. Your car has, my car's a Wi-Fi router. I can drive down the road and have my Apple hooked to the sound system, which is streaming off of the internet while I'm driving in my car, and not use the data plan on my phone because I have a wireless router and an internet connection in my car. Okay, my car sends me emails and says, "Hey, I need some air in my tire over here." That kind of stuff, right? It's a massive increase in quality. It's good for consumers, maybe. How do we account for it? It's really hard to do. Number 3, obviously, we get new products. We went from cassette tape to CD to downloading to streaming. How do we adjust for that? How do you put streaming into the CPI, where we used to have CDs in there, something physical, right? Ease problem. Definitely ease problem. And then we have what you call outlet bias. They only go to the big stores to get the prices, right? They're not looking at eBay. They're not looking at outlet malls. They're not looking at places where you might go shopping and get stuff cheaper. They go to the big name real stores. So there might be a bias in how they collect the price information. Okay? All right. There's 2 other price indices that we have. One is called the Producer Price Index. The Producer Price Index is like the CPI, except it's for businesses. So they go out to businesses and they find out what paper clips cost and what toner costs and what iron ore costs and what steel costs, everything that businesses use. And they try to figure out an index of what businesses use. The importance of this PPI is that what happens to businesses is going to happen to consumers. So if the costs of making things are going up, businesses are going to pass that along to the consumer, and the consumer prices are going up. So if you watch the PPI, it will tell you what's going to happen to the CPI in the future. We call that a leading index. It tells us, it predicts the future for us. Not perfectly, but it does a pretty good job of predicting the future for us. If the PPI is not going up, you have a pretty good idea that for the next 6 months or so at least, the CPI is not going to go up. All right? And we already talked about the GDP deflator. That GDP deflator is essentially trying to be the price of everything, and it's how we turn nominal GDP into real GDP. Well, we already talked about that. Here's a graph of inflation in America. And you can see back here in 80, and if you went back further, it would actually get up into double digits sometimes. But inflation was about 9%, and then we had this recession and kind of broke it. And then it was 4, and then it went down, and it's been hovering around 2. This is 2. So it's been hovering around 2 since Bill Clinton became president right there. Okay, basically about 2. Yeah, 2. Again, we call this period the Great Moderation. Everything has calmed down. There's no inflation. There's less unemployment. If you take this one, if you take the one really bad recession that happens here out of the picture, then you've got, almost 30 years of really just nice, except for a pandemic and a financial crash.